So here's the thing. I had seen, when I had started researching the place and gone down this rabbit hole, and, you start to see these just stunning images of Socotra on the internet that you honestly can't believe this is real. I promise you, this tiny little island, it is real.
Hello and welcome to One-Off Travel Stories. I'm your host, Andrew Tawas-Jurna. Here each episode, I chat with someone about one of their favorite travel stories. That one story they've told countless times to friends and family around the dinner table. Today we're joined by Michelle Eyrich. Michelle is an adventure travel writer, blogger, and content creator who has explored over 90 countries. She's based in Texas in the United States, but she's got international ties to Papua New Guinea, India, and Nepal, so home is varied for her. Her writing focuses on adventure, sustainability, solo, female, and family travel, and under-the-radar destinations and experiences. You can find her work at her website, noplacelike.rome.com. With that in mind, today Michelle is going to tell us about her trip to Socotra. Socotra is an Yemeni island in the Indian Ocean. It kind of sits off the northeast tip of Somalia and then south of Yemen, but it is a Yemeni island. It's becoming more and more well known for its amazing and beautiful landscapes, but also for its trees. They've got a sort of often described as otherworldly or even surrealistic trees on the island. I think the dragon's blood tree comes to mind, but Michelle will talk about more. So I'm really excited that we've got someone on the podcast that's been there and is going to tell us about their experience. Without further ado, let's jump into it. Hey, Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm so excited to be here today.
Excited to have you. Thanks for making the time. How are you doing today? Where are you, I'd say calling in from, but like maybe a bit old school there. Yeah. Where are you calling in from?
In from Dallas, Texas, which is home. It's where I've been living for the last several years. So I'm actually like at home for a change. I've, typically spend quite a bit of time on the road, but actually I'm home today.
Great. Yeah, that's what I like to ask because I'm talking to travelers mostly, and a lot of times they're living living abroad or living wherever, just on the road. So you're home. That's nice, actually. It's good to be home every once in a while. Before we get into your story, your travel story, I'd love to hear a little bit about, what got you into traveling originally. Have you been doing this sort of your whole life? But your profile and all the traveling you've done. I know you do a lot of travel with your son. And I know you seem to be into scuba diving and the ocean, but that might be more recent. So where did it all begin?
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. So I feel like I've been traveling right from the get-go. I was actually born overseas. I am what's called a third culture kid.
Mm-hmm.
So I was born, my parents are from two different places, two very different places. And then I'm born in a third. So I was born in Nepal and then spent a lot of my formative years living in Papua New Guinea and Australia. So I think travel has very much been in my DNA. I think I've been very, very blessed and privileged that, when my father got posted overseas during the course of my formative years, part of his recruitment package was airfares back home to the States. And my parents were able to take advantage of these like round the world tickets that are a little bit less common now, but they were really awesome back in the day. And so we would travel around the world every year over our summer holidays, which for the Southern Hemisphere is the December-January period. My mom was a teacher, so we would have, 8 solid weeks of traveling every single year, even while we were living in a place that was foreign to us theoretically, right? So this is really just part of who I am, and I feel really lucky to have had that experience that has made it actually for me is very a little bit uncomfortable to be home for too long. I start to get itchy, very itchy feet to get back on the road and see something new.
Wow, that's really neat. Those are, especially Papua New Guinea, quite a place to grow up living. But
Yeah,
then you also apparently, it sounds like you had to go back to the U.S., so you had to, keep your connection back there over
yeah.
time as well, which is great. Very very cool. How many did you like? Have you lived then in a bunch of different places,
I
or did you
have.
kind of go from there back to the U.S., or were there other stops in between?
Mostly lived overseas until I finished high school. And then once I was starting university, returned back to the States.
Yeah.
Did my undergrad and graduate school in the States before joining the Foreign Service, and then went to Cambodia. So kind of started the overseas journey again at that point, and sort of my career path has taken me in several different directions, but it's not been uncommon for me to have a job that I'm also able to leverage sort of the concept of the workcation. I know that terminology is a little bit more recent, but I've been doing that for a long time, and so it's also enabled me to keep ties with folks that I've met all over the world, classmates. I went to an international high school, and my graduating class was like 60 kids from something like 45 countries.
Hmm.
And that was at a time, before the internet, before email existed. So, there was a lot of old school letter writing that happened before we then, before getting to university and having email and sort of rediscovering each other. So I've
Right.
been really lucky to logged a lot of miles.
Okay, so like your handle, no place like Rome, is really hitting home here for me, making
It
a lot more
very much
sense. Yeah.
is. Yes. Yes.
When did you start sort of creating content and talking about travel a bit more?
I had this job early in my career where I spent a lot of time. I'd spend like 6 weeks in Dallas, and then like 6 weeks on the road traveling around Asia and Southeast Asia, all the way down to Australia. I had clients that I was visiting in that area. And I started just by writing funny emails to my family and friends about things that happened on the road. And that was kind of before blogging really became a thing. And then when that started to rise, like people were like, why aren't you sharing? These stories are really like funny and ridiculous. And I don't know if I'm just a magnet for like some of the ridiculous to find me, but um, I would share these. And so it just kind of started that way. I think the website itself officially, I think when I launched it in 2018. And, it has been a labor of love because I do have a regular corporate job.
Hmm.
So that's something that I just really love to write and have pursued on the side. And then in the last couple of years, that's turned more into like writing for other sources. I've been
Hmm.
writing for some various digital publications and going more that route. But the blog is still up and does like get more content. Trying to lean more into that this year. So excited about that.
Very cool. A couple of threads there. One is as you said, you've got a corporate job. I feel like I always find it interesting talking to folks through this podcast and hearing about how they keep up with their travel, if that makes sense. Like there's just so many ways to do it, but one of the prominent ones is like, hey, most people have a job and then they are needing to figure out, oh, how do I keep traveling even though I've got this job. And actually, I'll bring in the second one, which is, you talk about a lot about traveling as a mom with your kids, and I feel like
Mhm.
that adds another layer. Like a lot of people are younger with a job, and they don't have kids or anything, and they travel when they
Mhm.
can on vacation. But then when you have kids, a lot of people stop, even if they used to, right?
It's so crazy because when, I had been travel was such an integral part of who I am. And it's really not about the travel. I think it's more about like this maybe adrenaline junkie sense of adventure and a curiosity about the world. Travel just was maybe travel is more just the what gets me there. It's the vehicle to help me expand on those pieces of me that really need to be, consistently like fed, if you will. But when I was having my kid, and I had him a little later in life, a lot of people were like, "Oh, good. We're really glad that you're having a baby now because we're really tired of like being jealous of all of your travel posts." And because I grew up in a family where we did that, that was part of who we were. Like, like I said, 8 weeks, it was 4 kids, 14 pieces of luggage, and off we went.
Mm.
That wasn't a very, like, it was very strange to me that people would think that would stop. And so I don't think I actually realized that people did stop when they had kids. I also think that tends to be a bit of a more American point of view because I do find in my travels, like all of my, a lot of my friends who live in other places, particularly if they grew up with the type of third culture kid lifestyle that I did, more of an expat background, this is not a foreign thing to do. So, my kid got on his first flight at 6 months. Um, and that was very intentional, the 6 months part, because I did want him to have like vaccinations and things like that before we got on a flight. But and off we went, and he's been to like 40 some countries at this point. He's now 13.
Dang.
But the irony of that is more about, I think, the places that he's been are less expected for the most part. Like he's not been to Italy. He's only, there's a lot of more common, I think, destinations that he hasn't been. But then he has been to like Tunisia, and so it's just, I think I like to visit less expected destinations. And I've kind of started to expose him to that so that at least he doesn't feel like there's particular places you can and can't go to. The world really is your oyster, and go for it.
That's a great way to think about it. Completely agree. I think, if you follow just what is it, the website with the warnings about which countries you
Oh,
do, you'll
it's the
never end
State
up going to
Department's
any.
website, who I
Yeah.
worked for. So
You'll get nervous. I think
yeah,
people get very nervous because it's a very careful, like these, you got to be careful out there, but
yeah,
there's a lot of countries out there that have warnings that you'll be fine. You just have to, pay attention and
yeah,
use your common sense. But that's great to hear. I mean, that's a lot of, it's a lot of countries by 13. So he's got a huge head start on most people with their travel, and probably the knowledge around kind of how to do it, to your point, as well, and being comfortable.
yes,
It takes a little while to feel that way, and to understand that, like, you don't speak the language, you don't know what's going on, but you'll figure it out. It's fine.
yeah. I
Going
think
back
they
to
also feed off of you because
as
if
a
you
parent.
approach that experience with,
Mhm.
okay, I don't fully know what I'm getting into, or I don't like have it all figured out. This is a new place to me too, but we're going to go into this with a positive attitude and, doing some homework and research appropriately. But kids will feed off of that energy from you. And so I think,
Mhm.
and now he's at 13, he does a lot of the research and has a lot of opinions about the itinerary and,
Mhm.
things he's interested in. And that's really opened up a whole nother fun part of the travel journey, I think.
Oh,
So,
that's so cool.
yeah.
And yeah, couldn't I think that's a great point. That energy, that sort of problem solving
Yes.
mentality that you need. Great thing to pass along, and to role model, to your point. Getting back to the what you said about crazy stories and starting the blog, I think that's a good transition or segue. to what we're, the story we're going to talk through today. So I guess give us a little background about the travel story that you want to talk about. Things like what year it was, why were you going there, where are we going, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So we are going today, Andrew. I am taking you to the island of Socotra, which most people, including my fifth grade teacher who still follows me on Facebook, told me she had to go look up on a map where this was. And she, you know, even I had not ever heard of Socotra. I think for those of us who travel a little bit more frequently and off the beaten path, it has entered the vernacular with a little bit more frequency in recent years. But in my case, the way my introduction to Socotra came about was from a photograph on Instagram, a single photograph on Instagram. And I will tell you that I'm not like a huge Instagram social media person. I'm not someone who has some big following and things like that. And I very much approach it with a little bit of caution about, especially in this AI age, photos can be doctored. Does this place even really exist? I really didn't know anything about it. But my now friend, Andy, she has a handle Destination Chaser. And I had been following Andy for a long time. And she posted this photograph of herself way up on a cliff top, looking out over the ocean with this very unique tree that was blooming next to her, which I eventually, after some, going down an internet rabbit hole, discovered was a blooming bottle tree. Also never heard of it. But this photograph just was so stunning and so peaceful. Like the takeaway from this photo for me was so much peace. And I was like, whatever this place is, like, I need to go there. So that led me down a rabbit hole of like finding out where this was. So Socotra is a pretty small island. It does belong, in terms of boundaries, it belongs to the country of Yemen, which, if you're an American, immediately you have some concerns. You're talking about those travel warnings. All the red flags start jumping out, and people just, think about there's, a very serious war going on there. There's, a conflict that's been going on for a long time. It's very not somewhere that is on most people's travel radar. But this island is actually sort of, as you enter the Arabian Sea and coming up into the Red Sea, like around the Horn of Africa there at the top, it's actually a little closer to Ethiopia there, or I'm sorry, Somalia, than to Yemen. And because of its unique location, it really evolved a very different culture, I think, and this unique hybrid blend, because the Indian shipping channels, like shipping lanes, would come right through there up into the Red Sea. So you have this mix of like Middle Eastern meets Indian meets African culture, and it's a very unique place. For me, what also, as I went down this researching rabbit hole, was that how many unique endemic species of flora and fauna, particularly the flora side of it. There's over 320 types of endemic species that don't exist anywhere else in the world. And, that's the kind of thing that I'm just a junkie. I'm like, I want all the juicy animal and plant facts. And, I really was inspired very young, like reading about Charles Darwin and the islands of the Galapagos. And like, I really get pumped about things that not a lot of people have seen, and that I can go back and tell them about it. So I find this picture on the internet and go down this rabbit hole, and I'm like, okay, really afraid to tell anyone in my family that I'm actually considering going to Yemen, because I know the reaction is going to be like, what?
Yeah.
But so I reached out to my friend Andy, and she was putting together a tour group. And so I, long story short, was able to jump on that. But it's not a place that you can just fly and go off the cuff. There is some work that has to happen in terms of I went there in 2024, in the spring of 24.
Hmm.
The window to go, due to the weather in terms of the monsoon season, which can be kind of brutal, especially because it's this island without any kind of land protection at all. So the window to travel there is somewhat short. Their travel season is in the spring, but that is perfectly timed for that beautiful blooming bottle tree. And I hope everyone listening to this goes and Googles this tree now, because it is truly stunning. Um, and so, yeah, I was able to jump onto Andy's trip. You need to get a visa. Most countries will require that. But at the time that I went, they only had like two flights a week flying there, and it's not an official like chartered flight, if you will, but there's limited availability. There's limited seats. And so this was all coordinated by Andy. And if it's a place you're thinking about going, it is somewhere you need to do a little bit of planning. You need to think about your packing, because you are limited in terms of the carry on and check in. You also are going to be camping the whole time, which is what we're going to come back to in a minute.
Hmm.
And so you can't be hauling around a big, chunky, hard shell suitcase. Isn't really well suited for this trip. And you need to be really thoughtful about what you're bringing. You're not going to probably have access to laundry. You're not going to, in my case, I was like not washing my hair, and like it was really a different version of roughing it, I think, than even people who rough it more regularly do. And I was not someone who roughs it. So this was very, like, I wanted to see that tree so bad that I was willing to go down whatever path I needed to go down. So,
I've been down this rabbit path on Socotra, so at least I've got some idea. Where did you? Yeah, I don't like, as far as I could tell, getting there without a group is extremely difficult. Like that's the way to do it. Where did you also have to fly from?
so we flew from Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you didn't land on mainland Yemen at all. It was a direct flight
Yeah.
coming. Yeah, they did it twice a week out of Abu Dhabi directly to yeah, sorry, to Socotra. And yeah, it definitely, there's like, the thing is, it's a very untouched, undeveloped place, and in absolutely the best way possible. So, but that lack of infrastructure means that, like you said, you really do need to go with an organized tour group, because you cannot, like, there aren't roads that you can navigate. There aren't street names. This is very out in the wilderness. There aren't things that can hurt you per se. Like, it's not like there's big game wildlife that, you could have an attack or something like that, but more just getting lost, and how on earth do you find your way back.
Yeah.
Also, at the time that I went, um, you were completely off the grid. There was no satellite phone. There was no phone or internet access whatsoever. And I'd only done something like that once before, when I had been up in the Arctic. And so, but that was a little bit safer concept, I think, for my family, as opposed to, I'm going to an island off the coast of Yemen and you're not going to be able to reach me at all for 1 week. Um,
Yeah.
that ended up, I think, being one of the greatest gifts. But
Hmm.
you do have to make peace with that. Now, what I understand is, I've seen recent posts from people who've gone in the last year, and I think there is actually like satellite access. I don't know how spotty it is, and I don't know that it's available over the whole island. But generally speaking, I don't think it's particularly great reception. You might get a little bit though, but we were had to accept the fact we were not going to be reachable for a week.
Yeah.
That was wild.
All right. Well, I guess let's take us there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think for me, in addition, I'm not a big camper. And this is
Hmm.
really what came down to the catch for me. I been camping? Sure. You go camping in the United States, you, for the most part, like my camping experiences were at, you know, organized campgrounds.
Yep.
Sometimes you may have to go out in the woods while you're hiking and use the bathroom there, but oftentimes there are facilities. Even here in the States, national parks have designated latrines. I mean, so I really didn't have a lot of exposure to really really roughing it, and also typically when I've been camping, it's a night or two. It wasn't a solid week where I'm relocating almost every day and sleeping out in very remote areas. Like I said, no phone access. Like really, Michelle needs to go find, you're behind one bush and your new best friend is behind the bush next to you. And I mean, this was really, like I didn't have the skill set for this. Despite
Okay.
all of that traveling I told you about, this was not in my toolbox.
Yeah.
And so even the first night, the place that we had stopped, it did have a quote unquote bathroom that you could use, and
Okay.
I think there was a shower of some sort potentially in there too. I will tell you that that first night was that first place I walked in. I looked around at a lot of bugs and things, and I walked back out and I was like, I can't do this. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make it through a week like this. But most places did not even have that. And after 2 days, so there were 11 of us in our group, including our tour leader. And
Yeah.
then you have like a local on the ground tour, organized tour group that those, sorry, you're going to ask me a question.
No, it's okay. Finish up. I'll ask.
Yeah. So these guys, the local tour company would set up our tents every day. The guys did the cooking for us. They really did the heavy lifting. And in terms of the travelers, there was 11 of us. Mostly women. Ironically, we only had one man on our trip. Most of us solo female travelers.
Oh, wow.
And after 2 days of trying to navigate this whole like out in the bush thing, I had to, we're starting to bond. You really are learning a lot about each other, because in addition to the fact that you don't have internet, the flip side of that is you have a lot more conversations.
Right.
And the conversations become very quickly like, you're sitting around the fire at night and you're spending hours traveling through like bumpy roads in this SUV, over the course of the day. And we would rotate who we hadn't ridden in a car with yet so that we could get to know them better.
Oh.
And I feel like not being able to, we weren't sitting and checking email. We weren't trying to text people. And as a result, we really came together as a group. So within a day or two, these newfound friends were like family. And these women I have bonded with for life. We still, 2 years later, have an ongoing daily WhatsApp text thread. We live on all different continents. We're from half a dozen different countries. And we have been on more trips together since the Socotra trip also. So this really brought us together.
Wow.
But
I said, wow, that's great. That's
it's
really
been
nice.
amazing. But 2 or 3 days into the trip, what I realized was every time I was trying to pee behind a bush, Andrew, this was not good. I was peeing on my boots. I was peeing on it was a disaster. And so finally, by like the second or third night, we're around the campfire and I'm like, listen, somebody needs to tell me, what am I doing wrong here? Because this cannot go on for the rest of the week. And so you haven't lived until you've got women showing you how to appropriately squat. I had one friend, she's like, listen, the key is you need to look at the angle of the ground under. You need to go uphill. So you need to be standing uphill so that everything else goes downhill from where you are. Clearly, like that's like point A I had missed. Then they're like showing me like the right squatting moves, like, you know, I mean, there were skills learned here, Andrew.
It
Like, and
sounds like a hilarious
I feel
brainstorm
empowered.
situation.
Like, damn, I can go out. I can do any trip now. Like, I am ready after this. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it really was taking the girl out of the city, even this well-traveled girl who thought she really could do it all, had seen all the things. No, Socotra was a test that I clearly didn't have all the skills for. Now I do.
Were you guys cooking over a fire too? Like, what was the food situation?
So the food situation was all organized by the tour company, and you know, it was fantastic. I was not cooking over a fire. We had a lovely cook. He did all of our meals, 3 meals a day, plus he would spoil us. There's this fantastic Yemeni bread. It's kind of like a puffed sort of naan, similar to
Mhm.
that. And that would be our afternoon snack. And oh, it was delicious. I really still miss that bread very
Is
much.
it a fried bread?
It is a fried bread.
Oh, nice.
And you know, you want to eat it warm. I will tell you that it disappeared very quickly when it would be presented to us in the afternoon. Um, the food was kind of you know, like I said, because of where it's located, that flavor it's not spicy, but it's not spicy in a hot way, but it is spicy in a flavorful way, and it was delicious. You know, you had a lot of like chickpeas, and we had a lot of sort of egg related things. Not all of us. Some of my fellow travelers were vegetarians, and so we did have some fish. We had some lamb. It was mostly a lot of legumes and, you know, rice type of things. Really didn't. I mean, we felt very well fed for the week. I will tell you.
Sounds
And
that,
look,
that that part sounds quite nice. Yeah.
yeah, but Andrew, the other thing is, I will tell you, for me as a working mom with the side hustle, it doesn't take a lot. If I don't have to cook the meal, I'm pretty easygoing about it. So that is just a gift in itself. Someone else cooking for me is like a love language. So yeah, that part, they could have served me something a lot less wonderful and I would have been a happy camper. Pretty easy to
Okay,
please.
so you're roughing it a little bit.
A lot,
You're
a lot
learning, you're
bit.
learning, you're learning a little bit about handling yourselves in the outdoor or handling yourself in the outdoors.
Mhm.
But you're well fed.
I'm well fed.
Okay, so how about the island and what you're seeing? How's the trip going
So
at
here's
that?
the thing. I had seen, you know, when I had started researching the place and gone down this rabbit hole, and, you know, you start to see these just stunning images of Socotra on the internet that you honestly can't believe this is real. I promise you, this tiny little island, it is real. You've got like, you know, these sweeping plateaus with rocky cliffs, and then you get out to the coast with pristine sand dunes that if you do the workout, which ps climbing a sand dune really really much harder than it looks if you've never done it. So get your quads ready because it is work, but it is absolutely worth the effort. You get to the top and these views of the ocean that are just like out of a painting. Then we'd be out into there's like a national park area that is where you find not just one or two of what is the famous dragon's blood tree. This is probably the most famous image of Socotra. In
Mhm.
fact, the tree itself appears on their on the money. If you get yourself some of the the local currency while you're there, they have the dragon's blood tree on it. And it kind of, for people who are listening and haven't seen, it's a tree that looks like if you took an umbrella outside and the wind caught under it and flipped it up, the tree's branches are going like that and creating like this upward motion when it's fully grown. But it's there are cousins of that species in other parts of the world, particularly around the African peninsula. But really, this particular species that you find there in Socotra, it only exists there. And it is quite endangered. They have a problem where there's a lot of goats on the island. They are not endemic to the island. They were brought, during early seafaring days. And they are a core part of people's diets there. But these goats go and eat the baby dragon's blood trees when they start to sprout. And, goats are quite prolific eaters. And so as a result, they are eating up, they take a long time to grow this tree. And so with the goats just eating them up, there's not enough to replace the trees as they age. So they're starting to, we visited a nursery where they are growing them until they get to like a certain particular size to transplant them now, just to make sure they don't lose them entirely.
Right.
But so the landscapes are really what take your breath away here. Everything is a landscape on steroids. And because you don't have this infrastructure, you also are just seeing it at its most raw and its most untouched. And your little tent, that when you wake up and you unzip that tent, you just can't even believe the vision that you see. Like, it was worth like either sweating all night in my tent, or like there was the night that I had a little 8-legged visitor in my tent. I did have a roommate, my buddy Pyle, who we traveled together frequently. She was sharing my tent with me. There is to this day still a debate about the size of that 8-legged friend. I believe it was much larger and scarier than she believes it to be. But all of that was worth it when you unzipped that tent in the morning and saw these views. And like, it wasn't like you looked out in the ocean, you saw, big, boats or even big ships. You really looked around and saw no one else except the folks that you were traveling with. And that was day after day. And I don't think there's a lot of other places in the world that you can do that.
Yeah.
So,
well, unless you're out in the wilderness somewhere far camping. But at least, North America here, typically that's trees, trees, maybe some lakes, green. Yeah. It's very different scenery, a very different landscape for sure.
Very different.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, back, the wildlife piece of that, right? So if you're going to go do that kind of off the grid camping in North America, parts of Africa, there's serious wildlife you need to take into account. That's where you're really lucky. In Socotra, that's not happening. So you can really do this. And maybe the scariest things are the 8-legged friends, which I only saw the one time, or maybe, some other reptiles, small reptiles, but there's not like, big mammals that could potentially attack.
Yeah, you're not running into grizzly bears.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So from then on, 8-legged friends, outdoor issues. Mm-hmm. Was everything smooth? Any highlight? Did you see the bottle tree picture that you were talking about?
We did. Now, that particular spot that Andy took that picture, that she has kept a secret unto herself, is it's just this perfectly positioned tree that has grown at the top of a ridge with this sweeping view of the ocean beyond it. And so you got to go on Andy's trip specifically if you want to see that particular tree. But
you have to send me the link.
Yeah, I'll send you the link.
Yeah, I can post it
But
with the podcast as well.
the thing about this tree, they are all over. It blooms for just a particular window in the spring.
Hmm.
And it's the flowers look similar to, like, if you've ever seen a frangipani flower. They're kind of a delicate flower like that. The tree itself, it's similar, like the trunk is shaped like a baobab tree,
Yeah.
like what you would see in Madagascar, right? But it's smaller. And so you've got this tubular trunk. You've got this kind of rather, not a lot of leaves on it, but it really shows up when it's blooming, this tree, and just spectacular. And so we got to see them, all over the place blooming.
That's so cool. And for those who haven't seen these trees, definitely look them up. It's almost like a surrealistic kind of painting of trees sometimes, the way they
Mm-hmm.
look. Very different, very
Mm-hmm.
different.
Mm-hmm. And then I think, the other thing is, I know that there's really a big, one of the travel trends I've sort of seen in the last year or two is there's been a lot of uptick in dark sky travel. And you haven't seen a dark sky until you've been to Socotra, because really, there's only a handful of other places I've been, because you are so away from any light pollution. This Milky Way was, I mean, it was every night too, right? You've got a week straight of amazing landscapes by day, and then glorious nights where I mean, just shooting stars from every corner. And you don't even have to try, you don't have to be a fancy photographer, you're getting the Milky Way on your, my little iPhone without a lot of effort. So just exquisite. And it was worth not showering for like 5 days. And it was worth, learning appropriate peeing techniques, and, getting really comfortable with, hanging out behind a bush on my own. These were just not things I had done. I'm definitely ready to embrace my role as a scout mom now.
Yeah, good for you. It's yeah, I mean, it feels like sometimes no matter how much you travel, there's always some circumstance that will be brand new at some point, which is great because you just don't want to you want to keep having those, right? Or at least I do.
I think so. And I think, like, really, it's those moments that you are so outside of your comfort zone. Those are the ones you really don't forget, right?
Hmm.
I know that my Socotra gals are going to listen to this podcast, and they are going to be giggling to themselves about demonstrating that peeing technique for me, but also just the laughs, the stories, like, we're hanging out of an SUV, like out the windows, taking pictures of each other. You're climbing, they have these wadis that you can go swim in.
Yep.
And very similar, I've seen similar wadis like in Oman, for example.
That's like an
um,
oasis, correct?
Exactly. It's
Yep.
kind
Yep.
of an oasis, but inside like a rocky area almost.
Yep.
So you got to do the work to hike in to the wadi. And then you go down into what is this beautiful freshwater, usually pretty clear water. And we had a couple of gals who were not confident swimmers. And it was really like, a bonding of the women, like, well, we're going to make sure you're still in the water and have this experience and lift each other up. And I think that that's why we're still, to this day, so, um, like this sisterhood, that we all grew together on that trip, that made it just so incredibly special beyond the landscapes and the night sky.
Well, it's so nice and so lucky to have that,
Mhm.
honestly. you don't find it on every trip. And I know I haven't taken a lot of group trips, and I feel like it's because of the opposite reason that
Mm,
you're explaining, which is you could
yeah,
end up with a bunch of people that you don't connect with for whatever reason, and then you're in this like group. I'm very used to just
doing
being
your own thing.
alone,
Yeah,
solving my problems, and
yeah.
meeting people along the way, right? Which I love. But this sounds amazing too.
Well, I'm sure that not every group trip that goes to Socotra has this bonding experience that we had, but I do think there's something to be said about the type of person that will put themselves out there for that really out of your comfort zone experience.
Yeah.
And I think there is plenty of opportunity for solo time here too. Um, whether you wanted to go for a dip in the ocean, bring your snorkeling gear. Some people would go on a hike and some people would not. You weren't required. It wasn't mandatory participation in everything. The other thing is, I really think the Yemeni uh, the Yemeni people who were our guides, we really bonded with them. We had nights around the fire, and they didn't speak a lot of English. So there was a lot of sort of hand communication, but we had nights around the fire with dancing and just very celebratory, really warm. We were also there during Ramadan. And so these guys, I just can't believe they would cook our meals and prepare this for us every day. So we did have our meals and eat at regular times of the day, but they would not. And then when they would break their fast at night, it was like such a joyful time, and I felt really privileged to be able to be witness to what that was like. I'm not Muslim, and
Yeah.
so to sort of see how that was experienced, I mean, that was incredible. We also had an experience where in a small town, one of the guides, we were able to go visit his home.
Hmm.
And the women were doing a henna sort of party, if you will,
Yeah.
and welcomed all of us in because we were all women, and in we went, and did these beautiful henna designs on our hands and our feet. It was really, most of the women couldn't speak English, but it was just this moment of, I see you. You are someone who matters. And I mean, particularly with what's going on in the world right now, I feel like it's moments like that that really make you feel more connected to that place. And now you care about what's happening in the news in a different way.
Well, what a fulfilling week, I gotta say. It just
Yeah.
sounds lovely.
Yeah. You got
Um,
to do it, Andrew. I'm telling you, it's March. So next year you got to book this for 27.
it's on my yeah. As I said, I've been down this rabbit hole, but this is definitely driving it home. Speaking of which, taking us back post Socotra and today or to today. Yeah, like what do you have in store coming up?
Well, as I mentioned, I've been really focused in on some writing for some publications. And so hopefully there's a few things cooking that I hope transpire opportunities there. But I do have a really excited diving trip coming up. There is a woman owned, it's a former oil rig off the coast of Malaysia, off of Borneo. On the east coast, there's a beautiful marine wildlife reserve, or wildlife park or sanctuary in Sipadan. And it's one of the places that still have really mind blowing, like large schools of fish, and the reef there is still in really good condition. And so I'm going out to this former oil rig that has been turned into a dive resort, and I'll be out there diving for a week at the end of April. Can't wait. It's been a couple of months since I've been underwater, and so that's my honest favorite place to be. I would, unfortunately, living in Dallas, my accessibility to spending time underwater is a little bit more challenging. So I'm really looking forward to doing that and chatting with the woman who started that business, because the dive industry is such a male dominated industry overall. And then for her to be the owner of this in Asia in particular, it's really quite, her story is really interesting. So I'm looking forward to chatting with her and hopefully getting some stories about that experience published. So we'll see how that
Man,
goes.
that sounds like an amazing trip. Super interesting. I'd love to do that as well, as well someday. Very cool.
Are you a diver?
I would not call myself a diver. I am licensed
Okay.
to dive. I have been on maybe like 6 or so, but not my particular passion. But it's also just it's a very cool experience. Well, maybe you'll have more stories to tell. It feels like you've got lots, actually. So maybe I'll get you back on someday to tell about your trip to Malaysia. But I mean, just a big thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing your experiences more broadly as well. I think this is just a very positive, very, very interesting way to look at the world. Also traveling with your son and giving people the confidence to travel with their kids. That's really special.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you today, Andrew. It was so fun, and like taking myself back to that really, it was really quite a life-changing type of a trip, and mostly in like a, wow, I can do this type of way. Right. So yeah.
Well, I'm glad you got to reflect on it, and
thank
hopefully people listening, if they don't get to Socotra, they get out of their comfort zone one way or another, right?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. And they can find, I write a lot about unexpected destinations on my website. So if they're looking for something they're not quite sure where to go, they can check that out.
Well, I'll be linking it to the podcast as well, so you can find it there. Awesome. Well, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Andrew.
A big thank you to Michelle for joining us on the podcast today and telling us about her amazing trip to Socotra, an island that I know I really want to visit someday. If you'd like to check out more of her work and her writing, you can find her at noplacelike.rome.com. And of course, if you've got an amazing story you'd like to tell, you can find me at oneofftravelstories.com.